they say that, some people say that celebrities should not pretend to be involved in social justice causes because they don't know what they're doing. I just want to say, and I know that she's my daughter and I love her and all that, but she's the real deal. I mean, she's not pretending, and I'm honored to be with her, and even though we've talked a lot about these things, I'm touched all over again hearing these words from her. So I love you, Eliza. My journey to coming to both establish and then work with THRIVE-Gulu is, of course, my own personal and particular and unique story. But I want to tell you a few things, and because I'm a professor and I'm used to always giving little bits of advice or mark this down, there are a couple of things that I'll try to share with you as I tell you my story of getting involved in this that perhaps you can find useful in your own lives. If not, that's fine as well, but I ran across a few things as I was reviewing my story that I thought might be useful to some of you here. So I will mention those as I go through this. First of all, one of the things that was very important to me before starting THRIVE-Gulu is that I did know a lot about Africa. I have been teaching for 47 years, and I've been interested in Africa. I've been interested in economic policy. I've been interested in demographics and immigration and history and all kinds of things. So learning about Africa is something that's been second nature to me. And that's one of the things I would recommend. If you decide to get involved with something, it's important to do a lot of background work. Not necessarily 47 years worth, but you know, we all start our journeys in a different place, but certainly it has served me well to have done a lot of reading and a lot of, and bringing together a lot of other people's ideas and experiences before I decided to launch this NGO in northern Uganda. So that's one thing that I would very much recommend. The other thing, though, was interesting, that I had to do some more, for me, almost more private kind of study on before I started this NGO, was the area of trauma and trauma healing. I'm a political scientist, and so as a political scientist, I had not spent much time reading about trauma or trauma healing. But I've always been interested in it, and I'm not even sure why. I have friends who were very, very seriously abused as children, and somehow in the process of being a professor, partly I think because I have a sort of motherly air that people tell me about, I've had a lot of students who've come to me that have been raped, or they've had other kinds of violence committed against them, and I usually end up taking them, if they'll go, to the counseling center. But it's been shocking to me to realize the trauma that they've experienced, and also how much it has interfered with their lives in some cases, but also how much they've been able to heal from it. So I had many experiences with rape in this domestic setting. And I also was interested in the kinds of things I was reading about in the press about returned veterans who'd been to Iraq or in Afghanistan or many other places that came back with the trauma, PTSD, and were undergoing different kinds of treatments and either somewhat succeeding or not succeeding at all in recovering from that trauma. And I was interested in both what was happening to them in their lives, but also I was interested in the stories of what went on in the lives of their families and that rippling effect that trauma can have. So I got thinking about Africa, and I got thinking about trauma, and I started thinking, my gosh, what happens when you have a whole region, you have a whole village, you have a city which has been at war for 20 years, and then the war is sort of over, but left behind are thousands and thousands of people who are trying to deal with trauma. So I became fascinated by this issue. How do people recover? How do people heal themselves or heal one another from trauma in a post-conflict situation? So I decided, and this is again something that if you can set up something like this in your own life, if you can artificially set it up or in some kind of way, I decided that often the best way to learn about something is to try to teach it to others. So of course, that's sort of my way since I've been a professor. So I decided I would teach a course, and as Liza said, the name of the course literally was the rehabilitation and reintegration of former child soldiers into northern Uganda. That was the name of the course. It was in the catalog. Right, Eden? Because you signed up for it. So that was the name of the course, and a couple people said, I don't know how many people you're going to get signed up for that course. Well, I had 23 that signed up for the spring of 2009. I had read a lot before about what I was going to teach and have them read, and then they all wrote research papers. So they took this course, and then the other assignment for the course was at the end of the course, we would all go to Uganda, and we would meet the former child soldiers. And as Liza has explained, I got into this row with my the provost, who was worried about the safety of the students, who would not let us go to Gulu, and Wanjiku here in the audience. Wanjiku is the woman who was in charge of the agenda for our trip. She is a Kenyan working in Kampala, and she had this fabulous agenda for what we would do, which was supposed to include going to Gulu, and then that was stricken from the agenda. So the provost, after I put up a fuss, said, well, we'll let you bring people down from Gulu. As Liza recounted, this one woman, Lena Zedriga, brought people down, and a nun brought another group down. And that was also the turning point for me, just as Liza explained it here. The woman in that group that really captured my heart, and I've talked about her a lot, and she's in some of the pictures that you've seen, is a woman named Lucy Owl, AOL, which I thought was her email address. She did not have an email address then, but she does now. But her name is Lucy Owl. And when Lucy walked into that hotel, you remember, she was pregnant. She actually had gotten married since she was a returned sex slave, child soldier, all those things. She was there pregnant, and she had a little 3-year-old who'd wet her pants that was hanging on her knees. And I remember thinking, as if I knew, well, this one's not going to get healed. She is broken. She is done. She looked so collapsed and so weary of life that I just marked her off as one that was just beyond help. And I focused my attention on others that seemed to have more potential for recovery. But Lucy invited me up to Gulu, and the following year I went to Gulu. And here I want to add one of those other things that's a bit of advice. One of the things I learned, partly from Wanjiku and from others, is that you ask questions of everyone that you think knows anything about what you feel is your area of ignorance, your area of curiosity and confusion. And I must have asked Wanjiku a trillion questions in the few days that I was with her, and Wanjiku also sent us to other experts in the community. We asked and asked and asked. I recommend that. You can call it networking, but I simply believe that you should not be so worried about telling people what you know, but asking of others what their experience has been and what they might share with you. So I asked questions of everyone and went back to Gulu the following year. I actually went myself up to Gulu, and there I met Lucy under a tree, and she had this big group of women. And this was her group called Beads of Hope. And I had on some of my beads, but my glasses were getting caught in it. But those paper beads, that was going to be her profession, was to sell these beads. Well, the market is really quite swamped with paper beads all over the world. But Lucy had gone on to start a school, and she'd gone on to do many other things, and now she works for us. And she has another child. That child that she was pregnant with is named Judith. The other is named Eden, after Eden, who's our dear friend and on our board and has been on more trips than I have. So anyway, we asked a lot of questions, and Lucy was one of our question answerers. She was one of the ones who told us what people needed in Gulu. The other thing that I just want to say, and I will wrap this up, but in terms of starting an NGO, even though I knew a lot about Africa, and I still do, and even though I knew a lot about teaching, I did not know about how to start an organization. And so being 68 years old at that time, I felt that I kind of needed to set a timeline on either doing this or not doing this. My husband, Jim, my wonderful, fabulous husband, Jim and I had been in Dakar, Senegal. I was the dean of the Dakar campus of Suffolk for 2 years, from 2001 to 2003. So we were in West Africa, and we knew a lot of students, and we were fascinated by their lives. We knew some students from Sierra Leone and Liberia, and we heard stories that made us, when we finished with our being the leaders of the Dakar campus to do something humanitarian in the area of post-conflict circumstances and working with women. We tried for a couple of years with Liberia. We just couldn't quite make all the connections. And so when this came along, basically had to ask myself, how many more years are you going to give yourself before you just do it? You decide, you know, you could learn a lot more. You could still keep trying in Liberia. But it's not that I'm morbid, but, you know, I said to myself, Judy, your time is getting short in terms of starting an NGO. So I decided that Uganda offered greater opportunities for going into Uganda and getting there, because Liberia and Sierra Leone were still much more in turmoil. So set deadlines, decide you can't learn everything before you start. And so we set a deadline, and in 2010, we started what then was called Trauma Healing and Reflection Center, THARCH, and then we had an organization that was doing our rebranding say, that's not an attractive name, THARCH. So you need to be THRIVE. So we are THRIVE. We are essentially the same organization, and we're now almost 3 years old, and we now have a building there, and we're moving on it. And the last thing, just to say, is that this has been both an experience of sometimes getting discouraged, of course, because the managerial part of the NGO is very new to me, and other times, though, I have felt extremely optimistic. And so I take from my friend Eden, who was a student at Suffolk and now is a treasurer on our board, and has brought some things that are part of the raffle tonight, and loves Uganda as much as I do. And he always says, it is what it is. And so there are times when I'm just thinking, this is just too much. I'll say, Judy, it is what it is. And after he says that, it's just like, okay, it is what it is. And then I think that there are people in Gulu saying, it is what it is, and we're going to make it better in the morning. And so I'm happy to be here. I love it, Marcy, that you invited us. It's nice meeting you, Dean, Vice President, all the titles that you have. Lovely, lovely to meet you, Todd. And all of you DEIS impactors, you're a fabulous group. So thank you all for coming, and those are my remarks about THRIVE-Gulu.